Hello and welcome to this Python and Django live coding hangout. Today I'm going to be continuing working on a project for Jerry Life where we're trying to promote well-being or wellness in elder care communities, both for the residents and the staff of the elder care facilities. We've so far developed a tool to track the minutes and types of activities that the caregivers are conducting. And now we're adding in a second layer to track wellness activities for the residents themselves, such as going outside, enjoying art and culture and music, having other types of exercise and various activities that go above and beyond just simple essential care. In the previous session, we created this model, an app called Residents. In the Residents app, we have a view that lets us browse, lets us view another specific resident, just displaying their name there. We've also wired it up to the admin section where I can add a resident. Some resident and put them on hiatus. If there's some reason they can't participate in wellness activities, then we'll just be able to indicate that on their resident profile. They won't be selected, for example, to go outside. They may be feeling sick or otherwise unavailable. So that's the same flow. Now, in our domain model, we have residents who live in homes. And I need to create a relationship between the residents and the homes so that we can traverse from a resident page, for example, get the home that they're a member of, or from a home to list the residents. And on our through our experience of developing a prototype and deploying that in a large institutional care network, we learned that what seems obvious in hindsight, people come and go. They don't live at a home permanently. And so we needed a way for historic reporting to show who lives there now and who lived there previously without just removing the relationship entirely. We wanted to be able to trace the history of the home. And so we need not just a relationship between the resident and home, but we need an intermediary kind of entity, a database table. And what we arrived at was called a residency. And there may be another word for that, but essentially a residency is when a resident lives in a home. So we'll model that today. And the residency will have a resident and a home, and thus creating the connection, but also start or move in and move out dates. I think that's it. That's well, let's take a look at the other application code to see if there's any other fields to add. So let's go ahead and define a residency model. And I just realized the let's see if I can just do this. There we go. Hey Reza, welcome to the chat. I was just making sure I had chat enabled here. Let me put that in a place that's visible. How are you doing today? I'll go ahead and I'll just respond verbally. I won't be able to type in the chat on OBS over here. Okay, so let's see what we've got. I'm going to find some fields for this model, and it's essentially residency will have an ID field that is essentially auto-generated by Django, so we won't worry about that. For some models, we want to use a UUID instead of Django's default integer field. And we would, okay, so for residency, we have the resident. So basically, register with the OTP code, one-time password. foreign key. I gotta remember this. So 2. I'll just put on a new line. Equals resident. On delete, we need to determine what happens if the resident gets deleted. Do all their residencies get deleted? I think in this case it should not. We want to be careful here and not do a cascading delete because that would disrupt the ability to report, and statistics. The reporting would be misrepresenting things. So we're going to do models. Oops, on delete. Protect. We want to maybe prevent that from being deleted. We don't want a floating residency, so I won't use set null in this case. So we're going to define another foreign key relationship to the home, and I'll need to import the home model. It's basically the same code, but I'll just go ahead and type that in. Now for this one, I think we also want to basically be careful about deleting data. So if somebody deletes the home, the resident would still be part of the system, and we'll have some data visualizations showing the activity of a resident over time and based on categories. To a certain extent, similar to the work report. Like a calendar and some other charts there. So we don't want to, we can't just delete things that without, well, that would disrupt these charts. So we've got these two fields here. And let's over here, this well-being. Collections, residencies, resident, home, move in, move out. And it's got some validation rules. Now this is important because we can't have residents move out before they move in. So what I need is a way to represent a date range in Django with some constraints that is actually a range, and possibly preventing overlapping. So this is the first kind of challenge we'll encounter in the Django implementation of this software. By the way, Reza, if you're interested, you can check out the source code here on GitHub. Actually, I can't chat, unfortunately. Just paste the link there, but yeah. Very cool. Reza, are you working on any projects of your own, or what brings you to Python and Django? So let's look up some Django. Django date range field. Maybe there's a field for this. Contrary. Postgres field ranges. Okay, so this might push us further in the direction of Postgres. I am basically going to use Postgres in the long run for this application. In particular, we might have some Postgres specific code for the data aggregations. I'll have to take a look at it, but I'm not really ready at this point to commit the whole development process to using Postgres, although I can set up a Docker Compose file for the project. It just adds a bit of layer of complexity. I'd rather use SQLite as long as possible. It kind of goes against some conventional wisdom there. So there's one option, Postgres. Essentially, I would want a way of making sure that of validating the object. Let me just check it out. Stores a range of dates based on a date field, represented as a date range in the database and a date range in Python. It sounds exactly like what we want. Regardless of the bounds specified when saving the data, Postgres always returns a single canonical form that includes the lower bound and excludes the upper bound. All right, let's see if there's another way, but that's a good possibility. It's very specific. Dynamic category and subcategory dependent dropdown list in Django. It sounds like a complicated dropdown list. This could be a way to do it with just basic date fields. The thing is, I'm going to want to check overlap, so a date range is a good data representation for this. Now they're using date time fields. Interesting. It's not a lot of code to do our own sort of validation in the form, but it's got to be spread throughout the app. I'd kind of rather define it in the model and just go with that. Now, Django. Six years ago, there's a recent addition. It's a common pattern. done in the save method. Okay, well, for the first pass, I believe this is a reasonable solution to not only validate that the start date comes after the, before the end date, but also that the essentially the date range doesn't overlap with another model instance. We don't want residents living in two homes simultaneously, or at least we're not sure that's a valid use case. I think there's a way of doing this. Like unique together, but that wouldn't be quite it. All right, one moment. I'm going to get a refresher on my tea. I'll be right back. Yeah, another problem this is going to present is not only do I need to do the validation in the server, like in the model somewhere, close to the model at least, hopefully not the view or the form. I don't want to spread it in those too many layers, but the client also needs to enforce the pattern probably before the user submits the form, but I'm not sure. That can be added as an enhancement, but yeah, so this is just basically needs to be consistent. I'm not sure what type of form widget Django would use for this date range field. I can't really test this solution without Postgres, and I'm not sure what semantics I would use. So I'm going to use the move in and move out date. Hopefully the the validation's pretty straightforward, and the error message will propagate to the user, and perhaps we'll be able to enforce this constraint in the client before they're even submitting the form. Let's update one step at a time. So back to the thing. So anyway, this is similar to how we have on the minimum viable implementation, just with some other validation. Logic. All right. I believe we'll call those move in, move out, and they should probably be date fields. This one should be optional. And the move-in field probably should have a default, but let's see. Yeah, I don't want to call it. And let me just double check if there's an example. Yeah, we want a callable, not the actual output. Looks good. So we'll migrate this in, and we will register it with the admin. Oops. And run the server. We'll go to the admin. And need to set the plural. Should always remember to that meta. The time zone does get messy. We're only collecting the date. I hope that's not going to have too severe of implications. The problem is the activities are conducted on specific dates, but we don't collect the time. I don't think we record the time, so probably not a big deal. String model. Okay. String method. And get absolute URL method. I don't think I need the absolute URL method because it's just an intermediary table. Return f string and be resident. So call that property. At, I don't want to be language specific, so hyphen is kind of a little more universal. I don't know if the home name should come first or the full name of the resident should come first. It's kind of, it's relative. Person first. All right, good. So if I click that, let's see if that was introduced here. No. All right. Let me just double check the admin. Like I'm able to, what's this change? Here. All right, I'll leave that alone. Mysterious, but okay. I would like to use that as a property without breaking the Django admin. Okay, I can actually. I do like this. I know that I did wrong. I have to. So if I change this to a property, then I need to not call it anywhere. It's exactly what it's telling me, but in a very indirect manner, because I'm calling it inside of the resident model here. Where are we at? Here. That's the problem. Okay. Trace of the stack. Now it's a property, and this everything should work now. Okay. Alright, so yeah, changing this to a property, I can just use it dot without calling it. And inside the string method, I'm calling full name, but now I can just use a dot. Perfect. Now validation. Let's just commit this initial residency model. Very good. Validation. So there's basically two things that we want to validate. One is that this start date is before the end date, greater than or equal to. They can move in and out on the same day. I reckon probably very rarely that ever happens. Then, second one, I believe that a resident can only have a residency, one active residency at any given time. The edges are the tricky part. They move out the same day they move in. I can tweak the edges though, but it should be non-inclusive. Yes, it is greater than or less than. Now less than equal to. Alright, so let's check this out. Bake these functions, these assumptions into the save function. Hoikesty. That's nice autocomplete. That's we want to raise an exception. That's not. Let's see if there's an example of throwing an exception. Oh, here we go. Uniquely. That's kind of what I was looking for. Here. This is me. I knew it was me. I'm not using Postgres. Almost 5 years ago. And actually, this is kind of the type of code I'd rather be writing instead of this imperative approach of the save function. That's exactly it. Well, I could take a detour into essentially Docker and get a Postgres instance running. So there's two validations I'm trying to tackle here at the same time, and I might be able to do another constraint. Well, actually, so I wouldn't need the second constraint, the greater than, a date range would give me the second constraint for free. In other words, that the start date is before the end date, move out date. But then the problem becomes the move out date's nullable, it's optional. They don't always move out. They live there for a while, so. The date range field might not allow you to input a value with the missing second Django date range. Trade-offs. It's limited. Oh, there's 4. Yeah, then the name of the field would be something I'd have to figure out. That would be residency period. Kind of awkward language, like more abstract, in other words, than people are maybe used to using in common everyday language. Residency is already kind of awkward language. Well, it's not very common. We don't use it very much. Residency. Sort of like medical professions or something like that. All right. Well, residency range is also abstract. I think move in and move out dates are pretty explicit. We're like used to setting the start and end date on a calendar, for example. And so it doesn't bring up the naming ambiguity and the uncertainty around how, setting a date range without an end date, and also introducing Postgres. I think I'll stick with the move in and move out for now, based on these uncertainties and the complexity it introduces. With the acknowledgement that I'm just going to have complexities in the other way in the validation stage, and I want to have clean code that will validate and inform the user of the issue, or not let them make the mistake in the first place. And there might be a JavaScript widget for that. Okay. So let's inform model. Let's see a quick example of this. Right. Validation error. Can you put a text form? Right. Okay. That's more conventional. Now that's from 2012. Yeah, I like having things closer to the model as well. And of course, Django documentation has it. It's just a bit difficult to navigate the Django documentation sometimes. Yes, perfect example. All right. That's probably the most important. I'm not sure there's an answer all upvote there, but then what do? You just don't return anything. You raise. All right, so let's check these two conditions. 20 minutes, and I think I'll have a good stopping point. So we're not going to call save now. We're going to use clean. That's a lot cleaner. All right, then when do I call super? I'm going to call it at the end, I guess. But beforehand, it's returning none, so it doesn't even return that, which makes sense. this. Just thinking this through a little bit, so I'm going to have these two conditions. I can set them as false, so it's not valid by default. Safe way. Maybe I'll refactor it in a minute. But, yeah, I don't like phrasing this negative because it's confusing. Or should I just default to the expected values and then only in the negative case? And let's just take it out. So if the self dot right. Otherwise it's null or empty, which is false. They're both false. I'm just gonna make sure we get in there with that print statement. Now for the more complicated one. There was a nice solution with any. I didn't know that one exists that particularly. Yeah, in this case, it's going to get defined. There might be a cleaner way of doing this without this need for that, but we should only run this logic if it the move out date exists. Now there may be a different conditional, but null is not less than or equal to a date, any date, is it? So we're going to look for residency object. We'll filter, then we're going to say exists. And then the move. Move in. I'm just going to do it here. Take a quick break and then come back and just think about this logic. It's probably wrong. I got to think about it for just a moment. This always confuses me. So anyway, I'll be right back. All right, so I think I've got the idea here. Let me just double check something real quick, or explain this. Draw. So what we've got, can't save here. All right, I have to save to my disk. We got a residency here. That's what we're trying to add. There's start and end dates. Ooh, that's not the right button. Okay. There we are. All right, start and end dates. Let's just say we got a few more of these. Let's change the color. This is one we're adding. And this is one that's already been added. We've got a few of those that have already been added. This one here. And previous to that. And one. Do like this basically. Good point. So this person has moved around quite a lot in the system, but these are their residencies. Their history and the residential care system. I'm trying to add a new one here. And I need to check if this is valid, red or green. Right now it's red. Because, does it overlap? Well, they moved out of this and they need to move in pretty much on the same day. So in that sense, there's no overlap, not a meaningful overlap. So these are equal. Now, however, somehow we've got a residency that's been entered previously that for a later date. So this one won't be valid because the start date for this residency overlaps is less than the end date. It can not equal to though, because you can move out and move in on the same day. We want that to be valid. And you can even maybe have a gap, I don't know. That's another interesting thing that might cause problems later, but if they have a gap of residencies and somehow somebody records activities for that resident, those wouldn't get attributed to the correct home. They'd show up on the resident chart. So an activity should have a constraint that it needs an active residency. Interesting. So maybe the activity relationship should go to the residency. Wow. Instead of resident. Think about that later. So now we're valid. Right, which means my code was invalid. So what we need to take is take off these equals first. And then the move-in date should not be, let me see. There should not be any residency objects where the move-in date is greater than this one's move-out. You're not moving into a residency before this one has, before you moved out of this one. It's less than. Move in, less than, greater than. Yeah. All right, so the residency object where the move-in date is less than this move-out date should not exist. It is very confusing. Like, my gears turn very slowly with this stuff. All right, but I think that was okay. Let me just move on. There should not be any residency objects where the move-out date is greater than the move-in date here. In other words, where you're still resident in the other place before, after you move in here, should be less than or equal. In other words, greater than. I think that's correct. Now, we've got some meaningful variable names. Let's do the validation. I'm just trying to think of how to be succinct, but also explicit. I'll just be explicit for the cost of a few extra lines of code. In other words, I was trying to think how to raise the exception, what that code should look like. So I'm going to use these two meaningful things, and residency dates are valid is kind of ambiguous. It's not just that the dates are valid, it's that the residency period is valid. Residency time span. Or more directly, the move-in date is before the move-out date, which is just the code explaining itself. So this is a little bit higher level. The residency time span is valid. All right. So let's just do if not. Arrays and some documentation. Localized text, and I get text lazy. I thought we already had it here. Yeah. Oh, right, to the function. I know it's a bit verbose. And this is a bit redundant, but they're different error messages. I don't know if you can throw multiple errors in some cases. Move a little closer there. Doesn't quite matter. I'm not sure if I could turn this into more succinct code. Got this check here. I don't want to play code golf. Now let's just try throwing some bad data here. So we're gonna have a 524 to the 28. All right. So you just for the same. Oh, I just realized. I also need. It's for this resident, not just the fact that a residency exists. So there we go. So this resident should only live at one home at a time. It doesn't matter which one. That worked. So let's try moving in on the 28th and out on the 31st. We can correct the wording later. Let's add residency. And move in dates like that. Move out date is tomorrow. Oh yeah, and what was the other? Oh yeah, so let's try actually. So that's working. Let's try this though, where the move in date is the 28th and the move out date is 22nd. We're probably getting some console logs. Or if I just clear that. All right. So it's going to get a bit verbose. Or sure, there's a succinct way of writing it, and it's escaping me. Yeah, it's not too bad. Yeah, this needs a unit test. Yeah. It's 3 o'clock though. I'm going to call it a break, day. But yes, to do add unit tests for this residency model. It's good though. It's working. It's a bit mind-boggling, hence the need for unit tests. There's several, a couple conditionals here. Very cool. Very cool. All right, well, thanks for checking out this Python and Django live coding hangout, and we'll be continuing working on this project on another date. Writing the unit test for this model is probably the next step, and then we'll need to look at some front-end code, so to speak. It's going to be Django, Python, and the Django templating language, possibly with a little bit of JavaScript, but I'm not going to go front-end crazy or heavy, I should say, with any kind of framework, JavaScript framework, until it becomes evident that that's needed. And in which case, I would probably lean towards a progressive enhancement framework rather than completely throwing out everything about the Django templating language and server-side rendering and all that stuff, only to have to reintroduce it in a different paradigm and language ecosystem. So Thanks again for checking it out. I hope to see you on the live stream in the future. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to send them in the video discussion or on GitHub. Thanks a lot for your time and have a great day.